I'm Tanmay, ambassador from India, and I'll be your host. With me, I have Suk Savoy, the ambassador from Laos. You'll hear from her during the panel discussion session, and Hana, who chairs the UNA Scotland team, and the members of the UNA Scotland. The brief context for this session today is that energy and energy transition related issues have been in the news more recently. The conflict around Iran has disrupted a major part of the global energy flows, and energy demand is rising again, not because of population, but because of technology this time, with the growth of AI and the data center related growth that is coming in. And the energy issues are now again at the forefront, with countries looking at how they can meet this demand. So we are in a situation where supply is uncertain, demand is rising, and countries are now being asked to transition faster, add capacity faster. And this is where our real question is, and where some of the context of our today's session begins. That both developed and developing countries are grappling with energy transition, but what really it means in practice and what challenges it brings is still not fully understood at a much more granular or much more practitioner level lens. So today we are taking a slightly different approach. And instead of focusing on success stories, we are focusing on failures. Because very often it is through what did not work out that we learn the most and we can improve and build a much better feedback loop. So by the end of this session, the goal is that through these examples, there are amazing speakers who are coming from policy, academia and financing side will share. The hope is that we leave you with a clear understanding of three things. One, why energy transition can be more complex in developing countries, what mistakes and challenges have already emerged in real projects and policies, and what lessons can help shape better energy transition strategies going forward. Before I go to the speakers, a quick look at the agenda. We have a very simple setup for today. I just gave a quick context. Next up, we'll move into a small poll where we want to understand how our audience is thinking about energy transition, and then how your thought on that poll sort of shifts towards the end of the session, where we again do the same poll. We'll move into the speaker stories where we want to devote much of the time to those, where Dr. Paolo from Scotland, Sushrut from India, and Rashraj from Lao PDR will share their views on their work in energy transition and what policies or practitioners or what technologies they've seen fail and what lessons we can learn from them. Then we'll move into a panel discussion, an interactive discussion where Suksuva will take the lead and ask our panelists some questions. Here we encourage the audience to ask questions, and you will also have a chance to ask us questions at the end of every presentation. So please feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box. Just add the speaker, and we'll keep on directing them and bringing them into the discussion. Finally, towards the closing notes, I'll come back again and summarize what we learned today and what will be potentially the next steps as we keep on thinking about the energy transition and how UNA will be involved further. So, Hannah, over to you if we can quickly launch the poll and see what are the results that we can get.
The poll should have been launched by now. If you can't see it, do let me know.
Oh, God.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll in about 10 seconds.
I think everybody has voted on this, so we can
Yep.
go to the second.
Should I share results?
Sure, yeah. It's, well, the majority agrees it's both equally. I think we're getting some good responses on economic growth first as well. Let's move to the, yeah. And even in the second question, so it's kind of mixed value. Awesome. So I think at this stage, I'd like to invite our first speaker for the day, Dr. Paulo. He joined the Energy Transition Engineering Research Group in 2022 and is now part of the Island Center for Net Zero, where he contributes to place-based, action-oriented research addressing the wicked problems of the energy transition. Over to you, Dr. Paulo.
Thank you, Tanmay. Thank you, everybody. I'll share my slides. Can you see?
No.
There's like a window, a small window that's blocking the presentation.
Or am I freezing again? Oh, so is it working now or? Sorry,
No,
my
it
internet
says
connection is a
continue
bit
to share this
unstable.
PowerPoint window, and then yeah, now it's working. Now it's working. Oh, now it's gone.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay.
No worries
Well,
at
now
all,
it's
please.
okay. Now it's working.
No, now it looks
Just
like nothing's being shared.
right. We could only see you, Dr. Paulo.
Mhm. Now
Yes, now it's working.
is it
Yes.
okay?
Yes,
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And sorry again. So yeah, I'm Paolo Cherubini. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at Heriot-Watt University, Orkney, and my background is originally in chemical engineering, but then I decided to pivot to energy engineering, and I've done a PhD at the University of Pisa in Italy, where I'm originally from, on remote off-grid energy systems. So that fell under SDG number 7, and in particular fell under the first target of SDG number 7, which is to have universal access of electricity, universal access to electricity by 2030. And after having finishing my PhD, which had a big component of field work in East Africa and Central America, I worked in the private sector as a energy analyst, again doing the same thing. But then I sort of got lost of what was the question that we were trying to answer. And then I decided to change, and I'm now in Orkney. I put a map because I don't expect anybody to know where Orkney is. This is where I'm talking from. It's this remote island archipelago at the north of Scotland, where Heriot-Watt University has a campus. So I'll tell you why I am here and what am I doing there. But I wanted to give you first some background on what rural electrification is, and again the failures or challenges that I faced. So we're talking about remote rural areas in some of these countries where there is an existing electricity grid, but extending it to reach these remote rural areas would be simply unfeasible because of the costs and the distances involved. So where grid extension is not an option, then you have two other possibilities to either develop standalone systems when you have scattered users, so give them some individual form of energy generation, like a small solar panel, or if you have enough users that are clustered into a village, then you can consider doing a mini or microgrid. So I'll talk about these two options briefly. So standalone systems, they might look something like this, especially in East Africa, in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda. This is where I've been. There were lots of companies doing that, but also in West Africa, as in Nigeria. So there are small plasticky systems with a small solar panels, and they can be as small as just having a lantern to having a small domestic kit with the TV and some basic appliances. So they work all right for a bit, in that they are very short-lived. Usually they don't last more than 4 years. And there are some successful companies that are developing them. But again, as you can see from this quote that I put there, the system, the business model behind them is the pay-as-you-go system. So people just pay for them in installments. So basically they take 2 or 3 years to gain actual ownership of these kits. While, of course, since people can't afford to buy them upfront, so they will need to pay what they call here a poverty premium. So, if you, of course, sum up all the amount of all the installments that people pay, then the amount is much higher than the actual upfront cost. Because again, as they say, the point is not is financial sustainability for these companies rather than poverty alleviation per se. And the other thing, which again I found distorted about this model eventually, is the unintended consequences, say, of e-waste, which is a massive issue in many countries. Because again, if you flood the market with all these relatively inexpensive and short-lived plastic equipment, then they will end up in landfill.
Dr. Paolo, I think we're losing you.
Technological innovation. Again, missing the point, I believe, of what the actual issue at stake was at the beginning, which was again a myopic lens. Standalone systems are mini or microgrids of the form of renewable generation, usually in this case solar panels, that are then interconnected to some form of energy storage, so batteries, and then a diesel generator for backup, and then you have a local distribution grid with smart meters that goes to homes and to small productive activities. Hopefully, that's at least the intended goal, to have some efficient productive loads. And so again, this is the solution that, again, when I was doing my PhD, was handed into me, and the issue was to sort of make it work. So what are the challenges with doing this technological solution in a small remote rural place? Well, there's lots, but briefly, I would say the high upfront cost, high capex. This is the biggest. These things are expensive, and the thing is that they mean to serve an impoverished strata of population that don't have money to pay for a cost-reflective tariff of electricity, because again, so it is not possible to recover exactly the investment needed purely by privates at the currently. So that is, of course, the main difficulty, because the technology is quite clear. There is no real technological challenge. The on-field challenges are logistics. So how do you get all this equipment in a remote location? So yeah, it is a matter being involved not just in the monitoring of a mini grid on an island in Lake Victoria. So you need to get all the equipment in a container, ship it from China, have custom clearance, and arrange with barges now to bring all this stuff on an island. And so these things are of course really complicated. And then there is the operations. How do you operate these complex technologies locally? In the past, especially in the 70s and 80s, it was more common to have mini grids, where you just have a small hydraulic turbine, which is a much simpler piece of equipment. So this kind of technology, where it's possible, is much easier to deploy and manage, also by locals. But the biggest issue, so operations and training is a constraint. The biggest issue is getting demand right. How much electricity does a community that has never had prior access to electricity will use? This was a big conundrum for me, again, on a research standpoint, because you need to use proxies and other indicators. You can check, their older bills, so you need to estimate how much electricity they will use when you start, when you deploy the mini grid at first, and how this demand will evolve over time in shape and in amplitude. So this is really, because then all the design, the sizing of all the equipment depends on how you estimate demand. So if you oversize it, the investment will be too big and you'll never recover it. And if you undersize it, then people will be underserved. So these are all the challenges that, say, technical challenges that I have to face when deploying this kind of technologies. But then I told you that I lost track of what was the question. So the issue was estimating energy demand, but mostly that energy demand was not enough for private investors to be able to have bankable investments, that like people would never weren't able to pay a tariff that would recover costs for them, because then the need then was, again, as stated by the UN, by the international community, was not to bring universal electricity access anymore per se. The need was for bankable investments, because the private sector was mandated to develop these mini grids and not depend on grants and this kind of development finance anymore. So this was my actual question, was to develop bankable investments. And to de-risk this investment, my question was to estimate demand at first, so find ways to estimate this demand, but also how to create demand. As we said in the intro, it was said in the introduction, we have demand disruption by supply disruption, which is tragic. But so we have the opposite problem now, no? Like we have to reflect on how we can, reduce, energy demand and reliance on energy without compromising our welfare. And whereas here, the issue get people into the loop in a way of experience myself. Can you? I think I froze for a second. The challenges that I experienced was that, so there was an assumption that the energy sector should be restructured, liberalized, privatized. What happened in the UK in the early 90s, this was being mandated also for all of national utilities in sub-Saharan Africa. Having people developed meant to get them be able to consume and pay for, again, electricity and goods. There were unequal relationships between the experts, so people like me, and the local development partners, especially also in development projects, how people get paid. The amount of money that these people received was disproportionately low compared to experts like me, say. So there is this element also of bad faith and hypocrisy of, again, this sector relying on experts to fly around sub-Saharan Africa to tell people how to be sustainable, while again being on planes and cars all the time. And also, I have to say, as a matter of self-reflection, there was an element of white saviorism in entering in this sector in the first place. So this is why, in my mounting dissatisfaction in my 5 years of doing this, I found out about transition engineering. This is the book by Professor Susan Kramdijk. It's open access if you're interested. And very briefly, we are developing this new discipline in this remote island in Orkney. So 3 elements. Instead of thinking about preconceived engineering solutions, we focus on framing the issues at the heart of the matter, the root causes. We call them wicked problems. We realize that sustainability is sort of a trick. It can be a smokescreen. Sustainability thinks about incremental improvements to existing systems that are as a whole unsustainable, whereas we have to think about unsustainability of whole systems and how to reduce unsustainability, not make things more sustainable with a piecemeal approach. So instead of improving what is already there, the issue is redesigning it so that it fits within material and energy use. And yeah, we're doing this as part of the Island Center for Net Zero, which yeah, you can find more information about it online. So that was me. Thank you for listening, and sorry again. I hope that my connection wasn't too bad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paolo. I think this was great. Lovely to hear your views and very frank opinions on what are the real root causes of problems around energy transition. We talked about affordability. You also talked about, you took us to consumerism. You also took about told us about the mismatch between the development and the developed and the developing world. So thank you for the presentation. Um, I don't see any question, but I think I'll just have a quick question for you here that you talked about the unequal relationship between the developed and the developing world. How do you think there can be an equilibrium in that, or there can be a much better partnership between the developed world or the developing world?
Yes, thank you. The one of the projects that I was involved with that I liked the most was a training project with Mali, and I originally it was supposed that I had to go there to develop to give this training myself, but then I couldn't for security reasons, and that was the best thing that could have happened because we had to find then a local partner, a local trainer. Who was brilliant, and again, I sort of realized that again we give support and materials and everything. So it was eventually something that we delivered equally, me from Italy and himself from Mali. But maybe I think that we should embed in every project this thing of passing responsibility, where again, I think that this role of experts, especially that needs to fly around and do things, and even if I wasn't getting reached by any standards, but if you look at the budget of the project, I get paid 10 times more than a person in Mali. So, um, you know, I think it's a matter of phasing out. I think this involvement by Western experts.
Got it. Understood. So I think next up, we're gonna go to Sushruth. Sushruth currently leads the energy transition vertical at the ISEG Foundation, where he works with the state governments and the national institutions to design and implement large-scale energy transition roadmaps. Sushruth, over to you. And Sushruth's going to talk about some energy transition challenges across India in his work.
Sure. Thanks, Tanmay. Thanks for the warm introduction. Let me just share my screen. Let me know when you guys can see it.
Good. We can see it.
Perfect. So, just a little bit of background around the work we are doing. So, we are working with the Niti Aayog, which is a central government think tank of India, and then working with the states across. The idea is to work with 10 states in the next 3 to 4 years to build energy transition roadmaps, and not just give them a roadmap, but also help them in implementation of those roadmaps. So, things like capacity building at the state level, creating those centers of excellences for them, etc. So I'll just start with a little bit of context on what India's energy growth story is sort of going to look like. Currently, we are at almost 43% RE share in capacity, 20% in generation, which the target is to get to 90% according to the net zero transition roadmap that the government has built up. Uh, that means almost 90% of the RE capacity is yet to be built. So that gives a very great opportunity where we can build it right for the first time. And then also learn from the global examples where maybe people made some mistakes, and also learn from some of the earlier mistakes which India made. Uh, I'll maybe talk about one of the examples where currently we are facing the heat which other geographies had earlier faced. Uh, Putting up RE capacity is very easy, at least in India. You give out a tender, people bid for it, you get very competitive rates, which are actually cheaper than the thermal rates. And then within 1.5 to 2 years, you have the project ready. But what the biggest challenge becomes is the transmission network for it, which is usually lagging. And majorly, if you consider a big transmission network, takes 3 to 4 years to build up. We are seeing early signs of that. We have a couple of big states in India which are sort of the RE hubs for solar and wind, which is Rajasthan and Gujarat. Any new projects which is thought of being built there has a connectivity queue till 2030 or 2032. So any new capacity that people want to build there will be connected to the network only by 2030 or 32, because the transmission projects or the transmission lines haven't been uh, built till now for that. What we are seeing is also almost 8.1 gigawatt of capacity is stalled because of delays due to delays on transmission. So this is, I think, a very big challenge which India is facing, and is also going to face, because the pace at which the energy transition needs to work, maybe the transmission systems will need some innovation for them to catch up. So, as part of the thing that we are doing, we work with states to kind of help them think through their whole energy transition planning in a holistic manner. When we started this approach, and this started with Maharashtra, which is the biggest energy consuming state in India. Just as context, this the energy consumption would be equivalent to UK. So it's like a huge state. So the initial historical legacy systems were built on thermal capacity. So we had concentrated generation systems in the east of the country, and the demand centers in the west of the country, west of the state, which were connected by one or two corridors. Very easy. Every year, every 3-4 years, they added some capacity of thermal. It used to be very easy to get that done. Now, when we are looking at transitioning them to, let's say, 50% of RE generation, the RE is very distributed within the state, and especially around the north-south axis. So when we looked at their planning, we felt that, okay, this needs a complete revamp. So from a east-west transmission system, we recommended them to build a north-south corridor for that. Almost 7 corridors were planned for that, which are sort of now undergoing implementation. By 2030, a lot of those corridors will come into the picture. But one of the challenges that we faced was the transmission building is being done by the state utility, which does not have the capability and the capacity to take something of this scale. So it almost meant a 5x increase in their annual capex. So how do we make that happen? So one of the things which India sort of innovated maybe 10 years back in the central transmission system, we brought it in the state transmission system also, which is called in that enables private sector funding to happen. And in general, the projects get developed faster at a lower cost, and overall a win-win situation for the state. And Maharashtra, I'm happy to say that almost 10 big projects have already been tendered out and got very good response. So that's, I think, one of the challenges, but which was also sort of resolved. But it's a long way to go, as I would say, because transmission systems face huge issues in terms of right-of-way challenges. So that's one area which still needs to be solved, but hopefully that will get solved in the future. Similar thing, when we were working with Andhra Pradesh, similar kind of structure we see, where the RE power is concentrated in one region of the state and the demand centers are in other part of the state. And the surrounding states of Andhra Pradesh are very low in RE potential. So then it becomes a RE hub for the surrounding states. So then thinking about the intrastate as well as interstate network in a holistic manner, that's something we have pushed them to do, and they're sort of working towards that. So it's creating almost 100 gigawatt RE hub in Andhra Pradesh. Now, what this does is, as I talked earlier, Rajasthan and Gujarat, which were the earlier centers of RE development in India, it takes the burden from them. So the projects which are facing connectivity issues there, developers are also considering Andhra Pradesh as the hub, and they can use that to reach the targets which India has set up. Now I'll talk about a third example, which is around distributed RE, especially for agriculture. And this is a example from, again, the state of Maharashtra, where they have taken a huge at-scale agri-solar capacity program of 16 gigawatt. And this program, this is the, I would say, reloaded version of this program. The first version failed miserably. So in the first version, which is MSKVY 1.0, it's a huge acronym, but what they tried to do was put up 3.6 gigawatt of capacity. All of the tenders, etc., happened. But when the actual implementation started, the developers faced multiple issues, including the transmission capacity was not available. The substations were uh, not prepared to absorb this kind of a load. The land availability was a big issue. Multiple small projects kind of also uh, attracted smaller developers. So their overall capacity to manage the financing of such projects was very shoddy. So in general, what we saw was in the 2-3 years where 3.6 gigawatt was supposed to come, only 500 megawatt was installed. So then this program was completely redone. And all of the challenges, which were like small size of the projects, land availability, connectivity to transmission systems, substations, etc., all of these were considered, and a detailed solution was kind of created for them. So, for example, in terms of land aggregation, the government put in a system where they aggregated the land, put it into a special purpose vehicle, took in all the NOCs, all the statutory like requirements done, and then bid out those as like ready to go projects. Like set apart specific funds for transmission infrastructure and substation infrastructure. So that way, what they are currently doing is almost 16 gigawatt, of which almost 30 to 40%. This says 50 to 60, but in reality, 30 to 40 has happened by December 2025. And by end of this year, hopefully almost 100% will happen. So, but this actually was a very novel approach to solve two problems. One is accessibility to electricity for the farmers. So earlier, farmer used to get electricity in weird times of the day, like you will get electricity when the rest of the grid is on low demand. So that usually used to happen at night. So that meant that the women workforce of the farmers couldn't participate because they couldn't because of safety reasons and all that. Now what this does is they have daytime supply of electricity to the farms. So actually improves the women participation, provides more reliable power and more better quality of power so that their pumps and equipments don't face multiple failures which they used to face earlier. So multiple benefits. And subsequently, what also happens is it reduces uh, like the subsidy amount that the government used to pay for farming electricity. So this significantly reduces the cost of supply for them and hence reduces the subsidy that the state used to pay. So that's majorly the thing which is happening. Again, Maharashtra is a case example, but now there are 28 more states which need to go on this journey, and each state will face certain challenges. So learnings from this should be translated is what we are trying to do as part of the program that we work with the central government. So that's it from my end. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sushrit. I don't see a question here. In the interest of time, I think I'll move to Rashtra. And then once we move to the panel discussions, we can get back to you and ask a bunch of questions.
Oh,
So thank you so much. So Rashtra Raj is a project manager with GGGI working on carbon markets and energy transition and in Lao PDR. So over to you, Rashtra. Please tell us more about your journey in ET.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, apologies, I'm not able to make slides because I'm in back-to-back missions. So I had a mission end yesterday, and then I'm going on a mission tomorrow. So it's just the only time that worked out for me. Yeah, so as per the introduction, most of the work I do is on environmental markets, but I also manage our energy transition portfolio here in Laos, which I think is a pretty interesting question, right? Like, what does energy transition even mean in a country that predominantly has hydropower? So I think, first of all, that's an interesting question. And I think coming into a country office where you see that like overwhelming supply and the narrative is from hydropower, you really question what energy transition means. But then when you start digging up the underlying data, you realize that there's a lot of sort of like high emissions intensive sectors that are starting up. So I think in many ways, what I'm trying to say is there are certain countries that are already ahead with their energy transition goals, and there are certain countries that are only sort of like ahead of some of their previous economic models and how they're like looking at economic development. And I think Laos is definitely in the early stages of that, where traditionally it's been hydro dominated sector, and now there's increasingly more coal power plants being built. There's increasing presence of industry and manufacturing sector, and a lot of this, I think, from my experience so far, depends on the right data we have to evaluate what's actually energy transition or energy situation of a country means. So we are developing the NDC 3.0 for the energy and industry sector in Lao PDR, and that's one of the challenges I came across when we were developing the energy and industry sector NDC, is looking at the underlying data and trying to make sure that we're using robust data before we're doing any planning of energy transition, but also like just like energy targets in broad sense, right? So the data challenge was extremely difficult. I'm not a energy person at all. I'm an economist by training, so I have some background in data, but then sort of like looking into the energy data systems and how they're reported in climate inventories, in BTRs, and the discrepancies you have in those, I think, were the first key start points. The second is coordination within the ministry in terms of there's different departments collecting different data systems, right? So if you have a clean cooking project, data around clean cooking is managed by one department, data around hydropower is managed by another department, data around coal power, transmission lines, all of that is managed by multiple departments. So you really need like a coherent structure and how you make sure that all of this is tied within a framework. And I think this is particularly challenging for a least developed country and LDCs like LAPDR, where some of these infrastructure don't really exist. So that's the second part. Then the third part, obviously, is what do you do with this data, right? Like, and do you have the capacity to actually use this data and use it for transition planning? My answer for the third question is yes, of course, there is some capacity. The country comes up with really good 5-year plans where all of this data is looked at and sort of like, they come up with, okay, this is the future in terms of energy transition planning in Lao. But that's only one component, because then the second component, when you talk about policy planning, is finance, right? Like, how are you actually going to fund some of these projects that you have in the pipeline? So for the NDC 3.0, this was a big challenge in terms of how do we deal. So first collect the data, synthesize the data, and then how do we do like modeling techniques to understand projected emissions growth? How do we capture some of these very difficult political conversations, particularly around coal power plant? How do we capture data around cross-boundary trade of electricity? Who's responsible for underlying emissions? Sure, IPCC has a definition, but what does that mean when you include geopolitics? So these are all of the challenges that we had to navigate why we did the data modeling for the energy sector. And I think this is also why this is particularly challenging in developing countries and LDCs, because there's no framework on how you use modeling and data systems with planning the transition or planning and policy decisions and stuff. So eventually it did work out well. Sorry, this is not a failure story. So we did come up with a pretty robust modeling technique where I think we had to utilize a lot of policy work, like synthesizing existing policy documents on how we look at data and what type of data we look. The second is really making sure that the models that we were using for energy modeling were understood by the government. So we used a model called GACMO, which is a very simple Excel-based model. It has its limitations in terms of, the GACMO model has like global values for investment needs and global values for emission reduction potential of particular technologies and climate interventions and energy interventions, which obviously can't be contextualized for a country like Laos because we don't have the data, right? But having said that, we did work with GACMO, sort of like working very closely with the government on making sure that it's learning by doing. So they're putting all this data and understanding how yeah, like you can translate this data into actual policies and the impact of that policy. And I think it goes back to the first question that you raised in the question and answer earlier on economic development versus climate priorities. I was actually the one who said economic development because I've always believed economic development outweighs climate priorities, primarily when it comes to livelihood and climate adaptation, because you really need to secure investments and financing, right? So then climate will come in. But if we fail to do that, then climate, unfortunately, will be deprioritized, no matter how idealistic we are when we're providing these responses. So what we did with all of these interventions in the energy sector and industrial decarbonization work, what we did is something called GEM modeling to understand what are the impacts of these energy transition targets into the real economy, right? So when you implement 5% of cement substitution, cement substitutes in construction, what does that mean for the economy? And we also looked at different variables around increasing temperature, increasing inflation, increasing population growth, and how sort of like all of these things align together. And I think that was also something that was particularly interesting and challenging to do, because we can't talk about energy without talking about the economy, without talking about climate, without talking about politics, right? As we very, very rightly see right now. And I think the last question that I was prompted for this talk was more around what does that mean overall, and what lessons governments and institutions can take going forward. I think from my experience leading this project, what's been abundantly clear is robust data, both from collection, but also synthesizing and how do you deal with that data is extremely important to understand and forecast future scenarios, right? However, they're not useful if they're done in silos. And one of the challenges I had was really making sure that my modeling unit knew how to communicate with the government counterparts because they speak completely different languages, right? So for me as a non-energy expert, I think I was in a good position to sort of question these things that our energy modeling experts were saying and being like, hey, like, can you dumb it down for us? Because I don't understand it, right? So I think it's quite interesting for me to sort of like be in an LDC, be in a country office and try to sort of like work with European and international experts doing high class modeling work and then trying to explain that to government and local governments where English is very, very rarely spoken, on making sure that they understand how we should use data and how we should use modeling to advance energy transition planning. And I think that's sort of my biggest challenge is how do we make sure energy transition and energy planning works for local communities? We're not talking about the same language whatsoever when we're having modeling exercises or large seminars and talking about energy transition, whereas, the people who are most going to be impacted by energy transition are on the ground and don't speak the same language as we do. So I think I'll end it there with that big question in terms of, like when I sit in a country office, those are the questions that I have in my head. Those are the challenges I face on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, those are some of the examples that I've tried to utilize to resolve those challenges. Fortunately, the NDC is quite well drafted. It was presented at the IEA Energy Summit late last year. Again, it's being presented next week at the IEA again, and the NDC should be adopted very soon. So I'll then end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Russell. Thank you for your amazing presentation. And then, even though there was no slides, we didn't miss it. And thank you for structuring it well. I'll quickly hand it over to Sook, who can then drive us into the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all those speaker. It's very interesting and very insightful to hear that. So now I have a question that I would like to first ask Dr. Paulo. You mentioned that the challenge from mini grid that first is high capex, logistic operations. So it's very difficult to bring the investment. So in this case, I think that the government that need to play a very important role. So it would be interesting to hear from your experience or how that the government can solve this problem or facilitate the investment when there is this challenge in about mini grid. And yes, so this is the question to you.
Thank you. So yeah, within the framework of mini grids, usually the main obstacles were having a clear regulatory framework for mini grids and having stability also in the framework itself. Sometimes, and also, as Rasa was saying, planning. So the ideal pathway for developing mini grids would be that a country has a clear rural electrification plan with designated areas where the grid is going to be extended and areas where mini grids are going to happen. And once that decision is made, it should be stable, and then there should be so investors can come and already in which communities mini grids can be developed, and they also need to happen. They need to have certainty of what happens if the national grid eventually reaches the mini grid. That was another element of uncertainty, because mini grids can then be interconnected to the national grid if it arrives, but there has to be a clear arrangement in place, no? So that basically, a private investor doesn't want to face the risk of being expropriated of their own plant in case the grid arrives. So clarity and stability and planning, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's the very important point for the investor. Clarity and stability is not just only about this energy, but it's all about including the politics things in the government. So yes, next I would like to move to Susu. My question to you is, what should states, regional governments solve to enable a better RE penetration?
Yeah, I think I'll again maybe reflect what Paulo was also mentioning, that planning. I think planning is the most important aspect of it. Because when you're planning power systems, you can't have a very short-term view of, let's say, 2 years, 5 years. You need to think 10 years, 15 years in advance. And that's where I think the state needs to enable that, make sure that happens. Because a lot of the technologies that we are now maybe talking about in the developing nations, for example, storage, battery storage. These are investments which maybe will last, each project will last 10 to 15 years, but then the whole supply chains need to be built around those. And we have pumped storage projects which have lifetimes of, means officially 40 years, but they last hundreds of years. So when you're thinking about those long-term technology investments, the state needs to put a very clear long-term plan, even though it might change mm, eventually, but depending on what new technologies are arriving. But the states also need to have this visibility that it's not just the RE penetration in isolation, but the whole energy ecosystem and the power systems around it need to be planned holistically. And what experience we saw across multiple states is historically this was done in silos. So the distribution company will do their own contracts of, let's say, RE, thermal, etc. The transmission company will think about maybe their 5-year plan. The generation company will invest in things which are right now, right here. So then all of these need to be brought together, and the state is the best entity to do that. Individuals in companies, individual utilities, individual private sector players might not have the visibility or the ability to do that. So that's where I think the state will play a very major role. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so when we talk about energy transitions, it's all we cannot exclude the government as well, because they are very important key player, even we have the investor. But it's also very interesting, because I had the opportunity to review the energy strategy of Cambodia, our neighboring country. They also look a lot of depends a lot in the energies in Laos. They put a different scenario. How about if we have this? So now my question will back to Russia, because he work a lot with also government. So also linked to what Susha says, next 10 years. So my question to Rasa is, what do you think the governments in developing countries should prioritize in next 10 years and what we should drop out?
I mean, we drop out coal. I think that's the easy answer. But that's not going to be realistic for a lot of countries, right? You talk about Laos, you talk about Cambodia, Vietnam. I think, unfortunately, a lot of these conversations around, well, it makes economic sense to phase out coal. You very much hear that in big climate conferences and energy conferences. But then if you look at like coal investments in developing Asia, you still see investments that are going to lock in coal for 50 years, 60 years coming in and being developed now, right? So I think it's quite interesting for me, again, as a non-energy expert, to sort of hear these dichotomy in terms of people saying there's no future for coal, it's a stranded asset. And then I go to a country and they're starting construction with operationalization by 2032 and then closing down by 2060, right? So for me, a simple question is if it doesn't make financial sense, why are people putting money in it? But yeah, I think when it comes to 10-year planning, it's an interesting question because this NDC cycle is 10 years, right? So the NDC we've developed is 2025 to 2035, and that is aligned with the 10-year plan for Laos and I think also for Cambodia. I think there has to be a focus also on new technologies. And I think Shushut was talking about it a bit in the sense of we need to leapfrog this technology ladder that we have, right? Like we need to think through what are sort of like the emerging high-tech technologies, and somehow those conversations need to penetrate into developing countries and LDCs as well, as opposed to sort of like following the traditional energy ladder and securing energy transition and energy security for the country. What I mean by that, of course, CCS, but also things like green hydrogen, things like ammonia production. Can we think about green hydrogen for fuel cells, for decarbonization of heavy duty trucks? I think countries like Laos, for example, with abundance of hydropower, they can definitely start looking at those uh, energy technologies as opposed to just thinking like, okay, like small scale traditional energy projects that we've been doing for a while. So I think, yeah, maybe that's sort of like where I'm hinting to is we need to think a bit broader and not sort of restrict ourselves as we're a developing country or a LDC, so we can't do something big scale or something innovative. I think we can if we can just structure it financially and back it up with policy and some sort of like regulatory clarity. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I also would like to open the floor to our participants who are here. If anyone would like to ask questions to our speaker, please feel free to raise your hands or unmute, and then you can ask before I have my last question. Or if Tanmay or Hannah have questions, please feel free.
So I think while the audience takes the time to ask their questions, I probably had one thing which Sushruth had mentioned, that regional planning should happen, and that's the key lever that can unlock a couple of things. But it's also easier said than done, right? There's multiple local government agencies who are working, and getting them to act, come together, take decisions, move quickly is a very difficult task. So maybe if Sushruth and then Dr. Paolo and Rastra can also add their points on how are they getting the work done and getting the energy transition related work done in the local regional space.
Yeah, I think very good and very important point, right? Means when you need to bring together so many departments of the government, so many utilities, so many uh, developers, etc., together, there needs to be a political will to make that happen. And unless that political will is not present, it's very difficult to get that done. And not just political will, but also the stability to give the confidence to the investors that, okay, uh, even if the government changes, my investment wouldn't go into jeopardy. So I think that's a very critical point. And one of the criteria that we put when we are selecting states for doing energy transition work with them is this: are they willing to do that? Is the state top leadership, which includes the political leaders as well as the bureaucracy, are they aligned to the mission that we are going to take them on? And if yes, then we work with them. Otherwise, we have 30 states to work with, so we can choose and pick of that. But I think overall, even if the government is kind of like iffy about, okay, do we really need to do energy transition? Does it make sense for us or not? Does it clash with our development goals? That clarity kind of helps if when we are going on this journey.
Thank you. Rashtra, would you like to add something on this? Well, India has a large scale. Maybe how are you looking at it from the Lao PDR? What has your experience been?
Sorry, just to double check your question. So you're talking about how do we ensure the transition is just for local communities? Is that your question?
So the question was that how do you bring together different decision makers and stakeholders and get them to act and make energy transition happen quickly? But just transition is also a great idea. So maybe yeah, if you can add some points on that as well.
Yeah, I think I can speak on Lao at least, but I've worked across Asia before. But in Laos, I think we need to be extremely cautious that every country has its own processes of how do you get different departments involved, right? So I've worked a lot in India before, where there's so much technical expertise within the ministries and the Niti Aayog and everyone. And there's a separate process on how you bring governments together and how decisions are made. In Laos, there's a very unique system in place on how you bring different departments together, how you need to study their mandate, you need to identify the right people within the departments, and all of that stuff. So I think, yeah, like it's a bit hard for me to say like a general answer on how do you bring the government and different departments together. But I think if I had to give one general answer, just communication and finding the right communication manner to make sure that they're in the same boat. And in Laos, letters, like government letters, work extremely, extremely well on making sure everyone is invited, right? So funnily enough, that's my go-to strategy is if I need someone to speak to, I just send a letter and they will speak to me. And then that's the way like I approach everything, both in a central level as well as local government and provincial government. I think for a just transition, it's a bit challenging in contexts where you don't have a very active civil society, where you don't have a very active sort of like way of discussing these challenges with local communities, right? So I think that representation gap exists in multiple countries in developing Asia where it's not as straightforward as going somewhere and talking to local communities. Uh, I, I, yeah, my sort of thinking around this is also just like being real and being present in the country. I really want to echo what Paulo said earlier about how national staff and national consultants are treated compared to international staff and consultants who come in with these big expertise. And I think there's a tendency of listening to them more than listening to people on the ground. And I think it's also maybe a way of like we need to rethink how we think through expertise and what expertise in energy transition actually means when you compare it with lived experiences.
Thank you. Over to you, Suk.
Don't have time
Oh,
to.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, Dr. Paolo, if you might have any points.
Just briefly, talking about ORCME, and so not developing countries, but where I am now, there is, I think, an issue of asymmetry of power. ORCME, this island where I live, it's very resource rich. There is lots of wind, so lots of plans to, to develop wind projects to then bring it to demand centers. So the same challenge that we are talking about in India, which are in the south of the UK. So conversation might happen, but they are again asymmetric, and so it's also a matter of intention. So since they have been mentioned, I also would like again to put my transition engineering hat on, and together with others, I think that solutions we should question them, and engineering solutions such as hydrogen, CCS, direct air captures are, I think, also at risk of locking us into an expectation that engineering innovations can, bypass laws of thermodynamics and in a way escape. They're not, I think, escape pods away from unsustainable high energy demand intensive development pathway, which is what we need to get away from for planetary reasons. Because it's not just about decarbonization, but it's not about just things being green and renewable, but being sustainable or not. That's why I brought the example of solar panels becoming e-waste. So because you add something green, something renewable, but it's inherently unsustainable. So I think this also makes conversations really difficult when you compare like the sort of the planetary needs with what is what is expected also to happen also for having growth and in innovation in the sort of traditional sense.
Thank you, Dr. Paulo. So I have one last question to all of our guest speaker, or if our participants would like to also respond. This one is for everyone, let's say, for Tanmay or even Hannah is would like to respond as well. So what one things the world should stop doing in the energy transitions? It can be anything that from your experience. It's not necessarily about dropping the coal, but what one thing that from your recent learn from maybe that you learn from the failures or the success, one thing only from each that the world should stop doing for energy transition. Who
I
want to
guess
go? Let's start.
I always love and hate these questions, but I always love answering them. Um, I mean, I don't know. I don't come from an energy background, but I think like the world should stop making it so complicated. You know, I just feel like sometimes it's way too complicated than what it actually is. A lot of these technologies have fancy names, but you know, when you explain it, they're very simple ways of just doing something, right? So I do think in my conversation, especially when there's a language barrier, uh, the more complicated you make, the less interesting it is, especially for LDCs and developing countries. So yeah, that's what I would say. Thanks.
Thank you. So this means we just try to make it simple and not too complicated. Okay, next, maybe Susu.
Yeah, I think one thing, and this may be also true around multiple other topics, not just energy transition, is we should start thinking, I mean, stop just thinking about ourselves, but also think about our future generations. I think that's when you put that in perspective, everything I think changes. Because then the whole economics of energy transition also makes sense in your mind. I think that's one major thing which people need to stop doing and start doing, sort of.
Thank you. Next generation is very important. Okay, next, Dr. Paulo.
Yeah, I well, I don't know now. I got back to academia, so just also to have the luxury of entertaining myself with interesting questions and perspectives that are not maybe very practical. But I think that the thing that could be useful in stopping us to do, is focusing on incremental sustainability, but rather focus and concentrate on stopping burning fossil fuels, because that's what actually needs happening. And instead of looking for just thinking about all the possible replacements that could take their place, but focusing on what actually it would take to stop using them now and having and not waiting for a solution to compensate for them. I think it's a different shift. It's a radical shift in perspective that could help generate some maybe different discussions and something to consider.
Thank you. This means sometimes we can learn from the failure and just do it. Okay, Tanmay, I think you also need to answer this.
Yeah, I think I would probably resonate what Dr. Paulo said earlier, that you know don't look at technology blindly. Really look at how it's going to be implemented on the ground. Question the solutions.
Thank you. Hannah, would you like to add one?
Sure. I think this is something that's been echoed throughout. And it was very similar, sorry, to what Rostra and Paolo were saying. That we talk a lot, and this is, I guess you could say this about almost anything, not just energy transition, but we do talk a lot about, solving like the world's issues, and talk about climate change generally, and finding ways to, whether it's recycling, whether it's individual things like recycling, or whether it's advocating at government level. But we can talk about it all day long, but if we don't actually do anything, what is the point? So I think for me that would be the big thing.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not sure if our participants here would like to add as well, but if you would like to add, then you can just unmute your mic. For me, I think it's about the collaborations. So no matter what we do or implement, we really need to collaborate, not just only learning from each other, but the collaboration, because a lot of time that some people do and implement, but we can learn instead of trying what they have done already, but we can learn faster when we collaborate and also working together, and especially in this energy sector, not just only within our domestic country, but also in the region as well. So this is for me. Yeah, that's my perspective. So I think my role has ended. I think I would like to hand over to Tanmay to summarize this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suk. Thank you so much, speakers. Lovely listening to you all. So I had 5 simple learnings for today, and we said that we'll not do boring frameworks, but they might sound like one. So number one, question the solutions. Don't look at technology blindly. Uh, Plan regionally, plan locally. That's the second. Third is thinking in systems. Don't isolate or look at the ecosystem around. Fourth is think of people as well. It's at the end of the day, it's a community related problem statement. And then finally, it's break the silos, collaborate, work together. So these are the core learnings for today. No big speech, but finally, just a thank you for everybody who joined us today. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the UNA team, Hana, Makato, and Chinmay for organizing this session. Gary, if you're here, thank you so much for your continued support. Um, if this session has helped you think more clearly about these challenges, then probably we have done our job. We'll keep bringing you more such sessions on various topics around climate and energy, and we hope to also continue this in the energy front. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you have a great day.